All right, let's get into one of the most fascinating and, for a long time, unsolved human mysteries in all of Europe. We're going to the Pyrenees Mountains, that amazing natural border between France and Spain, to look at a people who've been a total puzzle to, well, pretty much everyone.
And that quote really nails it. They just don't fit. Not with their language, not with their genetics, and not in the grand sweep of European history. For as long as anyone's been looking, the Basque people have stood apart, like a living question mark. So today, we're going to unpack why that is, and how cutting-edge science finally gave us an answer.
So the very first thing that tips you off that something is different here is the language, euskera. And the contrast is, well, it's just staggering. You've got this one massive family tree, the Indo-European languages, right? Almost every language in Europe, French, German, Russian, even all the way to Hindi, they all branch off from one ancient root. And then there's euskera. It's not on the tree. It doesn't have any known relatives, living or dead. It's a true linguistic isolate, a kind of impossibility that somehow just survived.
And the deeper you look, the weirder it gets. While pretty much the rest of the world settled on a base 10 counting system, counting in tens, euskera uses a base 20 system. The Romans were here for centuries, and yet the language barely picked up any Latin words. That level of cultural resistance is almost unheard of. It just refused to bend. And this stubbornness, this linguistic wall, is really our first big clue that there's a much deeper story of isolation going on.
So the language alone was a huge puzzle. But then back in the 1940s, scientists started looking at the blood of the Basque people. And they found another huge anomaly, something that pointed in the exact same direction as the language. Deep, deep isolation.
Okay, so here's the deal. The Basque people have the highest concentration of Rh-negative blood of any population on the planet. I mean, in some communities, it's nearly half the people, while the average for Europe is way down around 15%. Now, when different groups of people mix over centuries, these kinds of genetic markers tend to even out. The fact that the Basque rates are still so high could only mean one thing. They hadn't been mixing with their neighbors, not for a very, very long time.
So you have these two massive clues, the language and the blood, both screaming isolation, but they couldn't tell us why. This is what led to two big competing ideas that basically defined the whole debate for decades.
So which was it? Were they a remnant, the last echo of Stone Age Europe? A people who just stayed put while waves of farmers and migrants washed over the rest of the continent? Or were they migrants themselves? Did they arrive from some totally unknown place and then become isolated in the mountains? Both theories had passionate supporters, but for the longest time, there just wasn't enough evidence to prove either one.
And that's pretty much where the story stalled out. For decades, the Basque remained this fascinating, unanswerable question. The tools needed to really settle the debate, they just didn't exist yet. But then, the age of ancient DNA analysis arrived, and, well, everything changed. The big breakthrough came in 2021. New technology finally allowed scientists to look directly into the Basque past, reading their history from the DNA of their ancestors in a way that had never, ever been possible before. And the answer they found? It wasn't what anyone was fully expecting.
An international team, led by a Dr. David Comas, did the most comprehensive genetic analysis of the Basque people ever. We're talking hundreds of thousands of genetic markers compared against thousands of other Europeans. They were specifically hunting for evidence of some mysterious outside group that the migrant theory needed. This was designed to be the final word.
And what they found was absolutely stunning. There was no mysterious outside ancestry. Instead, they found something even more incredible, an almost completely unbroken line of genetic continuity stretching back 2,500 years, all the way to the Iron Age.
The main finding, the headline, was that the DNA of Basque people alive today is, and I'm quoting here, virtually indistinguishable from their ancestors buried during the Iron Age. Just let that sink in. While the entire genetic map of Europe was being constantly redrawn by invasions and migrations, the Basque genome pretty much stayed the same. They weren't migrants, they were the original people, still there.
This just completely flipped the puzzle on its head. The real question wasn't some exotic, where did they come from? It was a question of endurance. How on earth, in the middle of a continent defined by constant change and mixing, did this one group manage to stay so completely themselves for so long?
And the answer, the researchers discovered, wasn't in the mountains. It wasn't about geography creating a physical barrier. No, the thing that preserved their genetic uniqueness was something else entirely. Something they carried inside them.
The primary reason for their isolation was the language itself. Euskera wasn't just a symptom of them being isolated, it was the cause. It acted like a biological wall, protecting and preserving their genetic identity for millennia.
And the connection between their language and their genes was incredibly clear. In the areas where Euskera was spoken without interruption, you find the strongest genetic isolation. In places where the language was lost over time, the genetics start to blur with neighboring groups. They could even find distinct genetic clusters that matched up with different dialects of Euskera. And get this, marriage records from as far back as the 1500s show that over 90% of people married someone from their own dialect group. The language boundary was the genetic boundary.
This makes the Basque what scientists call a genetic refuge. It means they absorbed so little of those huge migration waves that reshaped the rest of Europe that their DNA still carries the signature of what the continent looked like before all that happened. So, in a very real biological sense, looking at a Basque person today is like getting a glimpse further back into European prehistory than almost anywhere else.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? I think the most powerful implication is that this incredible 2,500-year story of continuity, it wasn't an accident of geography. It wasn't just about living in remote mountain valleys.
And this is a really crucial point. The Pyrenees Mountains are rugged for sure, but they aren't the Himalayas. Mountains slow down armies, yeah, but they don't stop the slow, steady pull of trade, culture, and marriage over thousands of years. Plenty of other groups lived behind much bigger barriers and were completely absorbed over time. Something else was at play here. What all the evidence really points to is a collective will, a continuous choice made by generation after generation to remain themselves. They chose to marry within their language. They built dense, self-contained social networks through unique cultural traditions and even inheritance laws. It was a choice that had to be renewed over and over, even when it would have been much easier to just assimilate. And that's maybe the ultimate lesson from the Basque mystery. It suggests that a culture, a shared identity, when it's actively and intentionally maintained, can be a more powerful, more durable barrier to the outside world than any physical wall or mountain range on Earth. So we can end with this thought. The Basque people survived intact not because of an accident of geography, but because they chose to, continuously, for hundreds of generations. Their incredible story seems to be proof that a people's collective choice to remain themselves can, in fact, be stronger than any mountain range.